In 2016, the World Series of Poker launched the biggest low buy-in tournament in history, with over 21,000 entries and a prize pool over $10.8 million. There sat an Uber driver who was just scraping for daily survival. Just months earlier, he was broke and even borrowing money from his dad. 6 brutal days later, he would stand alone with a gold bracelet and $1 million in cash, grinning to the cameras. But what did this guy do in 6 days that won him one of the biggest poker events of the year? Benjamin Keyline was born far from the bright lights of Las Vegas. Never did he or anyone else think he would one day dominate it. The 31-year-old grew up in a modest household in Colorado. He had spent a considerable part of his life in St. Louis, trying to find a steady footing while still bunking with his parents. Living an ordinary life came with several rough edges for Ben. He held down a number of small jobs, including working as a short-order cook in small restaurants. At one point, he found himself in a mountain town where work only came when the tourists did. Life was very unpredictable, and Ben often found himself living at the edge of uncertainty for extended periods. In those long stretches of drought and joblessness, poker began to catch Ben's fancy. But the glitz of the casino didn't matter to him then, and frankly, it still doesn't now. And the reason why is pretty special. We'll get into that much later. The thrill of making ends meet when regular jobs weren't coming his way was all he lived for, and poker provided that bend for Ben. See what I did there? He started with local games and small tournaments, playing with modest bankrolls, amounts that could easily have gone toward rent or food. Every little win then was a lifeline to hang on to. And since that was the case, imagine what the damage each loss did to him. I bet you can't imagine how devastating it must have been. But as biting as those losses were, they also taught him a lesson. To put your money where your mouth is, and to Ben, this only meant one thing: to learn from his mistakes. Bit by bit, he started building a scary interest in poker that was way more than a fleeting hobby. By October 2013, things had finally begun to click. At least, that's what he thought when he entered the World Series of Poker circuit. This was a traveling series of smaller events tied to the main World Series of Poker. Even though this wasn't like Vegas glory, it was a chance for grinders to prove themselves. And that's exactly what he came for. Ben managed to win a gold ring in one of those events against all odds. A World Series of Poker circuit ring is proof you can outlast hundreds of players, sometimes even thousands. That stunt meant public recognition, especially for someone like him with no sponsor or deep pockets. What a huge feat that must have been, you'd think, but wait till you see what came next. Of course, that victory gave Ben the belief he needed in himself. Maybe poker was going to be more than a side gig after all. Maybe it could actually be his career. So he started dreaming of bigger stages, bracelets, and six-figure winnings. And rightly so, because that's what any young man with a bag full of hopes would do. But life is never that simple, because even with the ring on his finger, the path ahead was less than pleasant. At this point, I'm definitely resisting the urge to call him the Lord of the Rings. Oops, already did. Sorry. Ben definitely knew what he was signing up for, because playing full-time meant facing countless pressures every single day. Very, very uncomfortable. Whenever wins came, the feeling was priceless, but cutting losses makes a man's character strong, and if that's anything to go by, then Ben's was forged in granite. One good tournament could pay months of bills, but a dry stretch could leave him questioning all his life's choices. He had to learn the hard way what many pros before him already know: the game is cruel. Ben had proved he could win. He did win, in fact, but that was just the taste of the dream. And in the months to come, he would discover if he really had the foundation to hold on to it. After his first big win in 2013, Ben Keyline decided to push harder into poker. The circuit ring had given him more than enough confidence, and his blood was blue with adrenaline and so much enthusiasm. He could now rub shoulders with strong players like the likes of Kenny Nguyen, Dash Dudley, and Yossi. He started traveling around to play different circuit stops. Some days went well, with runs where he cashed for several $1,000s. Other days ended in heartbreaks, with no straw to show after hours of play. His scores on Hendon Mob show a steady climb through these years, where small wins added up. He even scored some 5-figure payouts along the way, but those bouts of victory are never enough to make a man feel secure. Poker money could pay rent for 1 month, then disappear the next. It's just like winning a horse race. Maybe worse. That's the hard part people don't often see. That life might look shiny from the outside, living in hotels, casinos, and the big tables under bright lights. But people's spirits are always breaking around those tables. And for Ben, the grind was very intense. Imagine the long hours, longer trips, and the pressure of knowing one run could wipe out your weeks of sweat. Literally. That's a fascinating and dreadful reality all at once. So, as a smart young man, Ben spent the next 3 years studying hands and pulling through. He believed his hard work would bring results, and of course it did, but not the ones he dreamed of. Every small victory was a sign of hope. Hope for a future where poker was the answer. And then came the moment that really changed things. Ben was about to learn another hard lesson. The dream of becoming a poker pro was colliding with the reality of daily life. Poker could no longer cover his needs. Sure, it was exciting, but stability was far from it. And for a man, that means more than having love butterflies in your stomach. Soon he had to make a defining choice: stay in the game and risk going broke, or find a way to keep steady money coming. That's when Ben turned to something very different from poker. A hustle you'd never think someone with a circuit ring would ever subscribe to. And speaking of rings and subscriptions, consider subscribing for more interesting stories in the poker world. By the start of 2015, things had taken a rough patch for Ben Keyline. And when I say rough, I mean iron sponge kind of rough. It's a weird analogy, but think about it for a second. Poker had cleaned out his bankroll the way an iron sponge cleans glass. Until now, his career had shown a real promise. A World Series of Poker circuit ring and 5-figure scores, the kind of results that make you think a big breakthrough is coming. But the stability was gone. The biggest blow came early in 2015, when his financial backer decided to drop him. In poker, a backer is someone who gives you money to play in exchange for a share of your winnings. Having a backer makes it easier to take shots at big tournaments, but the safety net tore the moment his backer dropped him, which only meant one thing: he had to risk his own money to play every game, and there wasn't much of it left. It was easier in the days he was a daily grinder. He could gamble away his life savings on smaller pots and still have another hustle to run to. Now, this was his only hustle. And losing his backer was the exact moment things got very, very real. Bills were piling up. His small winnings were not stretching far enough. He had to face a hard truth. Poker alone wasn't going to pay the bills anymore. That's the moment Ben's pride took a sharp hit in the most brutal way. But how? Ben resorted to asking his father for help. He'd been away from home for many years, trying to eke out a living as a self-made man. Now, here he was knocking at the old man's generosity once more. He later admitted he hated doing it. Borrowing money from your dad in your 30s isn't exactly the dream you imagine when you start chasing poker glory. So that stung worse than losing any tournament. And don't even start counting how many chips were still left at the table, because at this point, it's fitting to say all chips were down. He felt like he had already failed at independence. The money struggles forced him to take on regular jobs again, starting from a brief stint where he worked shifts at McDonald's, and then he began driving Uber in St. Louis. Imagine that. One week, you're grinding poker tournaments dreaming of bracelets. Next, you're giving rides to strangers, hoping to scrape just enough to cover bills. But here's the thing. Ben never fully let go of poker. Even while driving, even while exhausted, he kept studying hands at night. He still believed there was a way back. In the middle of this, one thought kept nagging at him: the World Series of Poker. Every summer in Vegas, thousands of players gather for their shot at the stars. The thought of it alone seemed ridiculous to Ben. How could he afford thousands in buy-ins when he could barely afford gas? He almost skipped the series entirely. But that restlessness was all he needed to do something quite unpredictable. Ben scraped together whatever he could, some from family, some from small backing deals, and some from his own pocket. Just enough for one shot. He chose the Colossus II, a $565 event with a massive field and a life-changing prize pool. At the time, his hopes were low. He told reporters, "I almost didn't come." This was supposed to be just one last try, a way to see if a dream was still alive. But everything changed the moment he sat down in that crowded ballroom in Las Vegas. Nobody could have predicted what would happen next. The summer of 2016 in Las Vegas was steamy and full of noise. Among all the famous names and bracelets in that year's World Series of Poker at the Rio, one event stood out, the Colossus II. This was the cheapest buy-in at the series, only $565, but it drew the biggest crowds from far and wide. More than 21,000 people entered the event. In fact, to be exact, there were 21,613 names. The prize pool ballooned to a little over $10.8 million, a staggering number for a low buy-in event. The top 3,245 players would get paid, but only one would walk away with $1 million and the bracelet. The air around the auditorium was packed with amateurs, grinders, and pros, some chasing an easy score. Ben Keyline would probably have given anything to break into that category, but little did he know a different fate awaited him. Entering that competition seemed like a gamble on life itself, but he had made it to Las Vegas, and he was hoping whatever happens here would not only stay here. Surviving a field this big is almost impossible. You need skill, patience, and yes, a little bit of luck. Ben had mastered the first two elements. Let's see if the third would smile down on him. The Colossus had multiple day one flights. Thousands of players tried, many failed, and only a fraction made it to day two. And Ben played through the chaos. He busted on one flight, but came back, tried again, and this time he survived. By the end of day one, he had chips in the bag and a spot in day two. Day two was where the field shrank fast. Hundreds of players hit the rail every hour. Ben stayed focused. He picked his spots, avoided disaster, and stacked chips when he could. Poker News reports that by day three, he was in the mix with a healthy stack. It wasn't a straight climb, though. He faced danger more than once. At one point, he was all in with pocket threes against ace-king, a classic race. If he lost, he would be gone. But the board held up, and he doubled. That pot kept him alive, and later, he was able to build momentum. By the time the final table came, he looked tired, yet still focused. For someone who had almost skipped the series, sitting at this table was already unbelievable. But his biggest challenge was yet to come. The final table was filled with players chasing the same million-dollar dream. The payouts climbed higher with every elimination. Once a player was out, the pay jumped. Ben played carefully and bravely too. He picked off spots to chip up, folded when he had to, and waited for the right moments to strike. Then came the heads-up duel. Every other player had been eliminated except two. Ben Keyline with 45 million chips against Jiří Horák from the Czech Republic with 63 million. One man would walk away with a bracelet, the other man with a heartbreak. Horák had been strong all through the tournament. He looked like someone composed and ready to finish. But Ben had that stubborn look in his eyes, a look that said he wasn't going to give up now. The final hand became one of the most talked about hands of that summer. Horák raised on the button, and Ben, sitting in the big blind, looked down at a pair of jacks, one club, one spade. A monster hand for a heads-up match. He shoved all in. Horák snap-called with ace of hearts and nine of clubs. It was a classic clash, the pocket pair against the overcard hand. The flop came, nine of diamonds, four of spades, and two of spades. It was bad news for Ben as Horák paired his nine. Ben was still ahead though. The turn brought the six of spades, another spade. Now the tension doubled. Ben held the jack of spades, giving him outs to a flush, but he was still ahead. And then the river. The dealer peeled a card slowly, and it was the ace of spades, an ace on the river. The crowd erupted in confusion.
It's over. It's the ace of spades, and it's over. Look at that. What a tease. You see the ace and you get excited for a second.
What a way to go on a flush. Wow. Well, you know what? This was quite a final table. These guys played their hearts out, and does Horák know he lost?
Wow.
Does he even know that he lost?
His friends all thought he won.
At first, many thought Horák had just won. His pair of aces was now beating jacks. Some people on the rail even cheered. But then the realization hit them when they discovered that the ace completed the spade flush, and Ben had the jack of spades in his hand, which means he had the winning hand. Suddenly, the noise began to shift gears. Ben collapsed onto the stage, covering his face. And here's the funny part. Even his backer, who was sweating the hand from the rail, yelled, "Ace of spades!" as if it had killed Ben's run. He saw the spade flush and realized they had actually won. The confusion turned into laughter and tears. It was over. Ben Keyline had just beaten 21,613 other entries to win Colossus 2 with a first-place position, $1 million, gold bracelet, and a life changed forever. Now, some people said he got lucky, and that's true. You need luck in poker. But the truth is deeper than that. He had put himself in that spot. He had survived 6 long days, battled through 21,000 plus players, and played smart enough to still be standing in the end. Ben was very emotional after the win. He admitted in interviews, "I was ready to quit. He almost didn't even come to Vegas. And now here he was, holding the bracelet, calling it the best day of his life." But even after that victory, there's still a bigger question. What happens after the dream comes true? Can one win really change everything? Because as big as this moment was, Ben's journey wasn't finished yet. Of course, the Colossus win gave him a 7-figure payday. But if you listen to Ben himself, he wasn't exactly planning to live the high roller life. Right after his massive payout, he admitted he might still drive Uber, but just maybe in a new sports car. He told reporters he wasn't sure about grinding poker full-time anymore. Can you imagine that? One day you're winning $1 million. The next day, you're still considering going back to your previous employment. But Ben's story is striking for a number of reasons. The winning was less about the prize money and more about what the Colossus represented. A $565 buy-in with a field of more than 21,000 and a $10.8 million prize pool. That's the kind of setup where an Uber driver or a teacher or a construction worker can walk in with a dream and leave with life-changing money. That's why amateur players love these giant field events, and perhaps that's why you should too.